Hello, it's me, Ray, with yet another podcast episode. You might think this is odd, but it's all about insects. Well, not only insects. I've got some notes here, rattling my paper about. Hedgehogs are in decline. All sorts of things are in decline, aren't they? Insects, though, this is what I wanted to start with. Have you seen Chris Packham on BBC Spring Watch? He was saying, I read it somewhere, I think it was a tweet or something, that he sleeps with the windows open at night and he doesn't get any insects in the room, moths, crane flies, anything like that. He reckons he hasn't seen a single butterfly in his garden. I think this was a couple of years ago. Crane flies, moths. In the old days, he says, when he was a boy, he saw all sorts of things in the bedroom. You know, you have the windows open at night, you're going to get moths in the room, aren't you? You're going to get all sorts of stuff in the room. One brilliant example that stays in my mind of the lack of insects these days. In the, 60s, 70s, you drive your car at night, got the headlights on. It was like driving through a snowstorm if you're going into anywhere near the country, a country lane or anywhere out of the centre of town. Insects, like a snowstorm, hundreds, if not thousands, all hitting the car, the windscreen, the headlamps. The next day, you'd have to clean it all. Now, I remember that vividly, the following day having to clean all these dead insects off the car. I deliberately drove out into the country the other night, not far from here, only up into where the trees are, and shrubbery and some fields. It's not far. No insects at all, pitch dark, no insects. Well, I say none at all. I think I saw a couple of moths. That was about it. There may have been one other thing. 1, 2, maybe 3 insects, rather than hundreds or thousands, as it was, 50 years ago? Absolutely incredible. Talk about a decline. It's just amazing. Needless to say, the following day I didn't have to clean the windscreen or the headlamps. Ladybirds. Now, here's a funny thing. Do you remember we had a plague of ladybirds one year? I forget when that was. But many of Britain's native species of ladybirds are in serious decline. Now, where's my notes? Here we are. And whose fault is it? I shall tell you whose fault it is. It's the arrival of the harlequin ladybird. It preys on our native ladybirds, and they reckon that it's caused the decline of at least 7 species. How about that? Oh, including the popular 2-spot ladybird. So how about that? It's the harlequin ladybird. When last assessed in 2012, numbers had slumped by 44%. Can you believe it? 44% less ladybirds. Let's move on to moths. Do you know in Great Britain there are more than 2,500 species of moths? Can you imagine? I can't believe that. Or it must be true because I've written it here. I've been doing some research on the internet. That's where I've been getting this information from. So, yeah, and 900 are large moths, not the tiny little things. You know the little ones that, your grandma had mothballs in the wardrobe. Well, they're the tiny moths, the ones you find around the house. I don't think it's those that we're talking about here. These are the outside ones, the lovely coloured ones. Because the small moths, I've seen, probably 6, 7 or 8 in the house recently. In fact, my wife and I were talking about getting some mothballs because we weren't sure whether they're the clothes-eating types. Anyway, that's another thing. Yeah, in 2013, large moths had declined by 28%. 40% decline in southern Britain. That's interesting. No real change in northern Britain. Now, I wonder why that is. Bees. Do you know bees? Well, they pollinate everything, don't they? Without bees, we've had it. 70 of the 100 crops that provide food, for us worldwide, everyone, are pollinated by bees. So 70 of the 100, 70% basically, are pollinated by bees. And this is interesting. There are more than 250 species of bee. 25 species of bumblebee, 224 species of solitary bee. What are solitary bees? Oh, and 1 species of honeybee. Oh, there's only 1 poor old honeybee. I've written here about butterflies. 76% of the UK's resident and regular migrant butterfly species had declined over the past 4 decades. So over the last, 40 years, 76% decline. Moving on to beetles, 68 beetle species, 3/4 had declined in number over 15 years. I mean, the thing is, these insects, they're food, aren't they, for birds? Well, not only for birds, for all sorts of things. So, of course, if the insects go, the food goes, everything else will go. The birds will go. It's awful. And if the bee goes, the pollination goes, so our food goes. It's not just the birds, it's our food as well. Do you know, the other day, I thought, that reminds me. Someone said, oh, look, a hedgehog. And I had a look, it had gone. This was late one evening. Though it wasn't that they'd said there's a hedgehog, it was the way they said it. Oh, look, there's a hedgehog. As if, shock, horror, wow, surprise, a hedgehog. And that's how it is now. Hedgehogs have declined so much that you rarely see them. I remember as a kid, you go out to the garden, late evening, dusk is falling, hedgehogs sniffing about, grovelling about in the borders around the garden, seeing what they could find to eat. Now, just don't see hedgehog. Well, unfortunately, you see some splattered ones on the roads. Do you know, only a few years ago, we had 3 or 4 in the garden, regular, every night. I've seen 3 at once, but I'm pretty sure there were 4 different ones altogether. Every night we put out cat food for them and bits and pieces, bowl of water, never milk and bread. You probably know that by now. That's bad for them. They can't take milk and bread. But we haven't seen a hedgehog now for 2 or 3 years. In fact, the other evening we saw 2 little signs in the garden on the lawn that a hedgehog had been there. 2 little black poops. So that was quite exciting. Isn't it awful that we're now, oh look, a hedgehog, and it's exciting. It's so unusual. Back when I was a kid, you go out, you see hedgehogs in the garden. In fact, we had some living under the shed. I remember most years a family of hedgehogs lived under the shed. You'd see the mother come out, or whatever it was, the father, and the little ones would follow. And it was nice to see, but it wasn't wow, shock, horror like it would be these days. I'll never forget my granddaughter. What was she, 10 years old, something like that. She was in the garden. They'd come to visit us. She was in the garden and she was shouting, Grandad, Grandad. I was in the house. Grandad, quick, quick. And I rushed out. I wonder what on earth was wrong. And I rushed down to where she was. She's pointing at the ground. She said, look, 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 Grandad, look, what is that? It was a frog. I said, it's a frog. She said, I've never seen one. She had seen pictures. She said she'd seen pictures in books, obviously, and on the telly. But she'd never actually seen a frog. How about that? A real live frog. And I just showed her how frogs work. Just touched the back of him. And of course he hopped. He did a massive hop. We got a little pond. And he hopped right from the path, right over into the pond, splash. And she was delighted, absolutely delighted. And I thought then, fancy having never seen a frog, a real live frog. When I was a kid, here we go again, you're saying, oh, here we go. When I was a boy. No, it's true. When I was a boy, we used to go over to the woods. The woods now is all housing estates and stuff, concrete everywhere. But there were ponds and things, all sorts over there. We used to collect sticklebacks, tadpoles, put them all into a jar, a jam jar with water and take them home. Of course, we were sent back to the pond with them. I don't know what we thought we were going to do with them. Stick the jam jar in your bedroom on a windowsill or something. Well, they're not going to survive there, so we had to take them back. But I was always over the pond. Newts. I took a newt home once in the jam jar. He had this lovely red belly, and he escaped, and he was walking around the house somewhere. Luckily, my mother found him, put him back in the jar, and I had to take him back over to the woods. And there were frogs and all sorts over there. But the point I'm making is, don't take stuff home. It's not good. Well, you can't these days. There are no ponds. Oh, well, nothing like there used to be anyway. There used to be ponds and streams and stuff everywhere. And of course, after school, weekends, there's kids, not hundreds, but there's kids always going over to the woods, looking at the ponds and collecting things and learning. I used to like watching the water boatmen, just kind of walking on the water. It was quite amazing to watch them. Tried to put those in the jam jar as well, but they were too quick. The sticklebacks were interesting though, funny little things. All sorts of pond life going on, amazing. And of course the plants, the reeds and other stuff, all good things for kids to learn. Of course we had pets in those days. We had a cat, we had a rabbit. Talking of rabbits briefly, I don't think they should be kept in small hutches. We've got 2 rabbits. They live in a brick-built hutch. I built it myself out of breeze blocks, 14 feet long. They've got a huge outside run. It's a mansion. We call it Bunny Mansions. And I think that's the only way to do it. Really, it should be against the law to keep a rabbit in a tiny hutch. These little hutches they sell. They're awful. The rabbit can't stretch, he can't hop, he can't do anything. All he can do is sit there. And they're very often in these small hutches 24 hours a day. I think I mentioned in a previous podcast episode, since the corona lockdown and the less pollution, there seem to be more birds around. It's not just me saying that, other people have said there seem to be a lot more birds in the garden. We've got a patio roof. It's like a sloping roof over the patio. And of course in there, up under the roof, you get spiders, webs and all sorts up there. And I've noticed, even when we're sitting on the patio, sparrows fly under the roof. They'll come and join us, and well, not at the table. And they're flying around under the roof looking for insects. And I saw one the other day. There was I don't know what it was, something that a spider's web had caught. It was wiggling about. The sparrow came in and took it. It just shows you they are looking for insects all the time. We put out bread and we've got feeders and all sorts out there. Half a coconut with stuff in it and suet type fat balls and slabs and everything. But they do like to come under the patio roof and clear up the little insects for us, which is quite handy. We have several foxes around this area, as no doubt you have. Most people seem to have foxes around these days. They don't come into the garden. We've made sure they can't get in because we've got rabbits, of course. I think the foxes are aware of the rabbits. I've seen them sitting, there's a building behind us. I've seen them sitting up on that building watching. They watch the rabbits in the run, so I'm sure their eyesight's good enough to see them. But they don't try to get into the garden at all. They couldn't get to the rabbits anyway, it's all too secure. But it's nice to see the foxes. If it wasn't for the rabbits, to be honest, I'd invite them into the garden. The foxes could come in and have something to eat. But obviously, I don't want there's something to eat to be the rabbits. I'm just reading something interesting here. Professor Dave Gorson of Sussex University said, "We appear to be making vast tracts of land inhospitable to most forms of life and are currently on course for ecological Armageddon. If we lose the insects, then everything is going to collapse." I mean, how about that? That's a professor, it's not just someone on the news making stuff up like they do these days. But it's awful, isn't it? Everything is going to collapse. He goes on to point out that intensively farmed wheat and cornfields support virtually no insect life. And this means that as intensive agriculture spreads, there are fewer and fewer islands of natural habitat left to support them. So the poor old insects are on their way out, which means other animals that feed on the insects, they'll be on their way out. The bees are on their way out, so we'll have no food. Dreadful disaster, isn't it? As he said, Armageddon. But what can we do about it? The trouble is there are housing shortages and we need more roads and bigger, wider roads, just leaving less and less for the insects. Wouldn't it be strange? I've often thought of this, if we vacated the planet, if humans just left, right, shut everything down, turn the power stations off and leave. We might have to one day. It would only take a few months, I read somewhere, before somewhere, say a city like London, would start to be covered in weeds, plants, all sorts of growing material, moss and goodness knows what. Within a few months, it would be just covered in greenery. And of course, after a few years, you'd have trees growing in the streets and all sorts, wouldn't you? It would just go back to what it was thousands of years ago. Quite a nice thought, actually. The trouble is, I don't know where we'd all go. Our local council, I don't know about where you are, but our local council, they've stopped putting weed killer all over the pavements and the grass verges and on the main roads, all the islands and stuff. They used to mow it all, they used to weed killer it all. And it hasn't taken long, only a few weeks, and the pavements are covered in weeds. You see, they've all come just in a few weeks. The roundabouts, the centre of the roundabouts, the grass verges along the main roads, covered in wild flowers. Absolutely lovely. It just shows how fast, how quickly everything would go back to nature. How quickly Mother Nature would say, right, I'm having that back. You can get rid of your concrete, or she'll get rid of the concrete. It would all start cracking up, wouldn't it? Imagine that, tree roots growing, cracking up pavements and roads. Can you hear all those birds again? I said there's a lot more birds this year, and I'm right. Everyone's right. People have been putting on Twitter, has everyone got a lot more birds this year? Yes, we have. I don't think anyone likes wasps, but I remember the last few years, far fewer wasps than normal. You'd have your sandwich out on the patio, you're having a picnic. You get wasps all over the place. They're landing on this, they're landing on your cakes and your food. They seem to have not disappeared, but they certainly declined. Talking of moths, as we were earlier, Chris Packham, I saw on Spring Watch the other evening, was with his stepdaughter, Megan, is it? And they'd made this moth trap, not a jar with a light in it, but they put up a big white sheet, like a bed sheet, hung this sheet up, and then get a bright torch, these LED torches you get these days, set that up on something, shining at the sheet, and all the moths go to the sheet, so you can have a look at them on this huge sheet, and obviously take photos and all sorts. Good way of doing it. I haven't done that yet, but when my wife's not looking, I'll go and take a sheet out of the airing cupboard and hang it up in the garden, nail it up. No, I better not nail it up. Just out of interest, see what moths I can find. Okay, have you had enough of my ramblings about insects and things? If you see a hedgehog, by the way, in the middle of the day, what you're supposed to do is contact your local hedgehog rescue centre or place or whatever. Oh, there's a squirrel looking in the window at me. Oh, what a shame I can't take a photo of him. He's actually stood just outside the window and he's watching me. I'm talking about you. He eats all the bird food we put out. I put food out for him, but he seems to eat his and then move on to the bird food. He's gone now. I'll have a word with him later. What was I saying? I can't remember now. Oh yes, if you see a hedgehog in the day, they shouldn't be out in the daytime. So if you see one in the day, make sure he's all right and call your local rescue centre. Okay, that's enough. I've got my notes here. There's a load more stuff here, but I mean, I could go on for half an hour or more. Thank goodness you're not, I hear you say. Yes, look, it says here there's the issue of urban spread. Urban spread, I like that. Well, I don't like that. Housing schemes continue to encroach on our woods and heaths so that streets and buildings generate, light pollution. There we are. Nocturnal insects. Interrupts their mating. It does all sorts of, they don't know whether it's day or night. They don't know whether they're coming or going. On that note, I shall say goodbye. Thanks for listening as always. Look out for the next podcast episode next Sunday. Bye bye for now.